All right, looks like we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 58 of the Lost and Found Bin. I am SMQ, and I have here my co-host.
Chick. Hi,
Yes.
everyone.
Hey, everybody. Looks like we got all the usual suspects here, which is awesome, as always. And so the thing is, it's been a really weird week for me, Chick, because I have got some interesting information that I disclosed yesterday about the UAP UFO thing and the information dump that happened. And if you remember, on May 1st, I put out a video talking about it, and then the dump happened weeks later. And something like this is going to happen again in the coming weeks. And it's a process. It's confirmation has already happened, but it's going to escalate with confirmation. And oh, Angelia, thank you for being here. We do have a mod here. And by the way, everybody, Buster, he is having to do some other things today. So, Angelia, thank you so much for being our mod. It's awesome you're here. And what's going to happen, I was told, is that it's going to we're going to get more information like we got over the last 48 hours here. And the thing about it is, the way I'm learning is that you got to parse this stuff. You got to really pay attention, is what I'm learning here. And like, I was talking about the Hill chick, and what's so important. Why even I think it's more important in a way, for me at least, because I know a little bit about DC and stuff. Is that it talks about, it's really about people. It's oh, how do I? Oh man, I'm on the hill, and now I have to silence the hill. Let's see if I can do that. Okay, cool. So, because it's a harder crowd, so to speak, because they're DC insiders and all that kind of stuff. But it's a national security piece here that I sent out, and it talks about the UFO UAP thing, and it says here, it's says here, it's long past time for Congress to discover the answers to those questions and to share at least some of its conclusions with the public. The U.S. government came a large step closer to confirming the reality of UAPs when the U.S. Navy acknowledged in late April that there have been a number of reported or of unauthorized and or unidentified aircraft entering various military-controlled ranges and designated airspaces in recent years. And it says here, since 2015, dozens of Navy fighter jets have encountered UAPs. Just that first line right there, and that's the first line of the hill. They're saying basically, since 2015, dozens of Navy jets have come into contact with UFOs. Straight up, it says here, even once commonly referred to of UFOs off the east coast of the United States, some not so far from the nation's capital. Now, this is the Hill magazine, and it's kind of stuffy. It's for kind of, like I said, for people who are insiders and people within the Beltway and stuff. And I just really want to reiterate that, even though I normally don't do something like this, but it's very important for people to understand that the reality that is going to start taking place and the reality that's going to start happening in terms of us living with the reality and the facts of UFOs being real. And it's going to be another dump in the coming weeks here. And the reason why it's important is this all plays into this kind of dynamics of our reality changing. For Chick and myself, and for the rest of the crew that's normally here, this isn't that big of a shift in terms of us understanding that reality is malleable, understanding there's non-corporeal intelligences outside of our time, outside of our time space. What we're doing now is we're getting confirmation of those things, almost like jumping off the paper. Jack Parsons and others may have reached into the papers and pulled out and then put into this reality. Now things are jumping off the paper and dynamically jumping into this reality, into our consciousnesses and all of those things. And all of that is part of this, is part of the Mandela Effect, is part of the front-facing apparatus they call CERN. So I just wanted to really get that out there for people to understand what's happening in the coming weeks here. Sorry, Chick. Didn't mean to filibuster
No,
there.
that was good. There's just so much to even just I have just so everybody knows, I've never spoken to the contact, but when I hear like the things that are coming out, it's definitely perks my ears up. Especially, I found it kind of interesting that a lot of people were saying that there was going to be a big shift today, and then you were mentioning yesterday that there was going to be more information coming out in the near future. So I'm not sure if those two things are going to coincide, but we were talking about the different things that could coincide with whatever seems to be going on in this reality right now. And I was mentioning to you the other day, do you think there's a connection between the 5G rollouts and this UAP, UFO mainstream talk for whatever it means?
I mean, in terms of, I haven't heard anything, but in terms of 5G perhaps being part of now this is me speculating, I don't know. But in terms of just me trying to think logically about 5G, and I know that there are certain parts of how our technology works that we're not always privy to. I mean, yeah, I think that could be a possibility. I'm not entirely sure, but I mean, I don't see why not. I don't think that I truly think that what we're going to be dealing with is something that is something more akin to the CIA FOIA documents we've all been covering for months. I think it's more of those kinds of beings. Now, in terms of 5G, I don't know if it's going to be rolled out in terms to repel something like this or to, I don't know what, but certainly the timing, you're right. Whenever there's synchronicities and there's timings, your ears always have to perk up if you want to be, a credible observer in terms of trying to be as not, I don't want to be partisan, I don't want to be biased. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, why not look at that? Sure. Totally.
I'm definitely thinking that it's connected because I'm just like the timing of these things. Like I'm seeing mainstream, just like you had mentioned, sources coming across and talking about this, which used to be a huge part of truther and fringe community talk, was the UFO phenomenon, and I'm not very versed in it or anything like that, but I see a connection between that and between this 5G rollout. And there's so many commercials, and I don't know if it's the algorithm like is putting them on for me, especially because I've mentioned the word 5G around like devices, and sometimes it'll pick out words and then advertise those things to you. So I'm not sure if that's what's going on, but I'm seeing a lot of advertisements for like new 5G phones, new 5G networks, stream stuff, the latest 5G, and I'm going in different directions with, is it because people are becoming so much more aware, like we're in a different frequency bandwidth of what we pick up and what we're kind of sensitive to, and is the 5G to dull those senses or to make you more sensitive? Because I imagine if it was to dull the senses and to keep the kind of paranormal bizarre stuff that's going on more under wraps, then it doesn't make sense to mainstream start pushing at people like, oh, there's weird paranormal things out there. The military's seen this for years and years. I'm not sure if they're like prepping people for this or if they're trying to keep it under wraps with what's going on. But I just know that there's been a lot of talk about 5G and about kind of the electrical fog, and that it would make people's senses duller. So I'm not sure exactly which way to go with that.
Yeah, totally. I don't know either. I know you're right. In my recommended list, I get a lot of 5G now. And I've watched a couple videos, and a lot of it's about melting us down or making us sick or lethargic. Um, and I know a lot of people are nervous about being turned on. Now, I don't want to be alarmist. However, I also don't want to be naive either. So I wish I had more. Um, I wish I had more to go on, because the only thing that I have is what they've said versus, things like we haven't been digging that well. At least I haven't. I haven't, and I know Buster hasn't. At least what he's shared with me on 5G specifically. But certainly, in terms of it rolling out, and in terms of other channels seeming to pick that up, it is. And someone mentioned to me, I think on the video I did quickly yesterday, they mentioned to me they had already had 5G. I don't know what location they're at or if that's a true statement, but I don't know. I don't know. I know that when the cell phone came out, they said we would all have like brain cancer within 10 years, and we didn't. So, to be fair, I know there's a lot of worry about 5G, but I remember when they were talking about that. And, I know that I've had a cell phone to my ear and on my body at some point for more than 20 years. And knock on wood, I hope I'm healthy. I mean, at least since my last checkup, I've been healthy. So I don't know. I don't know. But my understanding too is 5G is a huge leap forward. So, and they're saying there's a lot of radiation and things that come with it. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
just like I'm seeing in the comment section right here, is the same thing that I was concerned about, was that it's not really so much about us, but that they're installing a lot of 5G towers next to like elementary schools and things like that. And I wonder if that's because children have such a heightened perception that maybe it's important to set those things up there. Because like even long before 5G, it was understood, like, don't put electrical towers and don't put cell towers on top of elementary schools or kindergartens because it's not good for children. But it seems to be purposefully done. And my
Wow.
thought, and I'm completely speculating here, is that it has something to do with the Mandela effect, the massive leap forward in what we're able to perceive and what we're able to understand at this point, and making sure perhaps that people don't wake up too much. And that might be just complete speculation there, but I'm trying to figure out why. Because I've seen plenty of videos too where people have gone to their city councils and said, "Hey, this is stupid. Don't put this on top of the small kids." And the city councils are like, "We agree with you, but there's nothing we can do. It's mandated and it's being ordered by the bigger authorities that it has to be in these particular places."
Yeah,
So
totally.
it
Yeah.
has to be something to do with perception, in my opinion, because children are so much more open to the paranormal. In that, not all of them, but a lot of times you'll hear that they can see things that other people can't. So I wonder, again, just wondering if that's why there's such a rollout right now.
Well, yeah, and I've heard things when children in terms of like what you were saying, their perceptions are much more acute. And I think there was something saying by the time you become an adult, the field of your perception is down to your feet and the soles of your feet. And that's why part of the reason why it's good to take off your shoes and to kind of have your feet literally touch the ground, so you can get grounded, so you can ground yourself in order to have the earth absorb that energy. And that's certainly probably a part of that. I don't, so I'm not sure. But now in terms of technology leaps, in terms of the Mandela effect, in terms of ramping up, in terms of the Schumann resonance, in terms of all of those other things, I certainly know 5G is not on yet, but all of these other things have been ramping up well before 5G is underway, or it's been underway for weeks or months or years or whatever. So I if it is going to be, it's going to be something in the future, perhaps. I'm not sure. But certainly what we've experienced in terms of the Mandela effect, what we've experienced in terms of what the government has started to admit, or factions within official channels have started to admit, is well before this 5G thing. I don't know if that's conflation or if it's something that is absolutely connected. So not sure. Not entirely sure. I noted one sidebar here. I know the Schumann resonance. I went back to the Schumann bot for the weekend that you found the shift. And I retweeted that out, and it looks odd. You don't have a full band, but what you have is you have three thick kind of they almost look like they want to be full bands, but it's not quite full bands. And I noticed a lot of people had retweeted it, and a lot of people had also shared it and liked it and the whole thing. So that is interesting.
That's certainly interesting. I saw it and I'm looking for it now, and now I can't find it, but I saw you had tweeted that out. So I could definitely keep a watch out for that particular pattern and see if anything weird happens again when it's looking like that.
Hmm. So Lanessa says SMQ, it is on. Hey, Lanessa, what do you mean specifically? What's on? Are you talking 5G or what are we talking about here? I'm not entirely sure. Um, so anyway, while I wait for Lanessa, people are mentioning Shazam in term, I guess, for a specific ME out there. Something about films and it's all kinds of things going on here in the chat. Here, I can't believe nobody's found a Shazam videotape yet. I remember vividly when my public library had it to rent. Oh, that's interesting for Supertramp. That's interesting.
I think it's going to muddy the water a lot that they've made a new movie that's called Shazam.
Yeah,
I mean, anything to muddy the waters and make things
you know
more
they did that on
confusing than
purpose.
before. Yes, exactly. Oh
Absolutely, they
boy.
totally did that on purpose. No doubt.
They could have picked any name, but no, they're picking that name, and it doesn't seem to be the same story at all from looking at the storyline of the original, and it's just, yeah. Suso says, yeah, that is so on purpose. Indeed. That's probably the easiest way to just like explain away everything is make something new with the name of the things that you're trying to say don't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing that is very interesting. Speaking of sources, they were talking about my source was also talking about the idea of liquid and space and this you can't it's impenetrable. So do with that what you will. You know, I like I've always said, I think the idea of patterning and people being able to pattern certainly has a lot to do with what's happening here. And I think this, whether it's the 5G, whether it's this UFO escalation, whether it's what we get on our recommended list, all of these things is part of that. And I just think that right now we're right in the middle of a re-understanding of our reality in such a deep and fundamental way that we've only begun to understand that process. And moreover, the most important part is if you're hearing my voice now, you're most likely awake. And that means you're more important than you probably think. So that's very important to start to put more value into your own senses, is what I can tell you, and your own beliefs in terms of what it is you experience, Mandela Effect and otherwise. And that's a piece of advice I'd like to give out there. Also, did you see that weird footage of outer space and they showed it almost looked like in like the bottom of a pond or something?
I didn't see the particular one you're talking about, but I have seen quite a few that are very strange. That it does kind of look more like water. But in all honesty, that seems to be coming back around again to the old beliefs about the heavens and the earth. It's actually like fitting in with what flat Earth people were saying. They said
Mm-hmm.
space was impenetrable. They said it's the waters above, waters below. They said the moon is inside the enclosed system. And now all this stuff is like coming out in different facets, and it's like is the dissolving and devolving consensus is becoming more and more bizarre at this point, as if the Mandela effect wasn't weird enough. Now we have aliens and enclosed systems and Elon Musk and who knows what else. So it's getting very surreal.
It is. It's very surreal, and I think it also has to do with us being more conscious of the multiple versions of reality. Something I want to address in the chat here. A bit of Venom says, "Not disclosure on UFOs. They just want to know where they are. It's now okay to report it." Right. It's not disclosure because disclosure is the explanation of what they want. What this is they finally have confirmed. This is them confirming, and that was some of the links that I've gave, and I'm going to give a breakdown of To the Stars Academy from Luis Elizondo, exactly what he says in there. Breakdown, we're going to break down minute by minute exactly what he's talking about, because he says in there, the truth whispers, and if you listen to the truth, it does whisper, and it tells you exactly what's going on. The problem is, well, not the problem, the people that really, really, really listen. There's such a small sliver of the population. I don't know if this is part of a broader rollout, so there's calm when it happens, but it is a bit more that just dropped. And that's why I started talking on May 1st. And then now we had the drop couple days ago, and we're going to have drops in the future, and it's going to be an ongoing process. But this is something of a bit of what we talk about when we talk about dissolving consensus. We have that process underway where there is multiple versions, there are tailor-made versions of reality and all these other things. At least that's what I'm seeing, that's what I'm understanding, and that's what I'm trying to get my head wrapped around in terms of, the waters above, the water below, the whole thing. And the dark mass, and people talk as, the dark mass above you, just it's impenetrable. And we've all seen the footage where a rocket goes so high and then it just stops, and just all of those things. I don't know what all that actually means, but I talk about that. What if I just, as a game to myself, what if you can get enough of a group of people that are belligerent enough that they can use patterning without knowing it, and they can reshape reality to their liking. And if you have multiple versions, then there you go. And not to scare people, but I've also thought about this with CERN. People are worried that CERN may create a black hole and destroy the Earth or whatever. But if you've got multiple versions of reality, you have kind of versions to play with, so to speak, right, Chick? I mean, I don't mean to be alarmist, but I kind of thought that.
It's very true. As in, like, if you were that way minded, which a lot of, I suppose, scientists would be, that they would kind of see, take the terrible things that are done to poor lab mice and lab rats and be like, let's do it with entire existences because there's so many of them. We can just experiment and do all this weird stuff. And then discover that actually a lot of them are self-correcting. When you pull them too far out of shape, they seem to try and self-correct, and then reality gets really strange altogether. But I was thinking about what we were just saying there about reality being holographic and basically made of light, as per the FOIA documents. And then this news about the kind of dark, impenetrable dark matter. It makes me, because somebody in the chat was saying it means we can't get out. I was thinking, what if, because they say that you only perceive so many different light bandwidths at once. Well, if our consciousness is changing with what we can perceive and what we don't perceive, and that's actually changing where we physically exist, or where our main node of consciousness at least thinks it physically exists, then perhaps there is, outside of the whatever the system is, that it appears to be just dark and it appears to be just nothing, that could be all light and different, even different civilizations or different, inanimate things or anything like that, but we're just not existing in exactly the same frequency bandwidth. So perhaps from outer space, we, like Earth and everything that's here, we just look like that black hole that looks like it has nothing in it. It's not actually a black hole, it's just a dark part of space. I forget what the name of it is. It's on the tip of my tongue right now. But I'm just thinking there's no reason why all things couldn't exist at the same time, but they're just not exactly on the same page. It's like a bigger version of what I do with my maps. When some countries exist and some countries don't at the same time, it could be like that. Like we have this enclosed system that's cut off from everything else, but there isn't everything else. It's just we don't exactly exist in the same place at the same time. So that means that if you changed frequency bandwidth, you actually could get out of this enclosed system, but you need to match the bandwidth of reality for everything that's outside. So it only appears as dark mass right now, but if you actually could perceive it, it probably isn't. It's just information you're not currently able to decode and interact with.
I like that. I like that. It's like a physical representation of what we see in terms of like the electromagnetic spectrum, and what we can see in terms of frequencies and sounds, what the human ear can perceive, what our eyes can see, and the band of light that we can see. And outside of that is a literal and a kind of figurative darkness. That's really kind of cool, actually. And then that's a perfect representation of human beings' limitations in terms of this plane of existence. Whenever we hit that dark liquid, or that dark matter that we see in the night sky, and we can't penetrate it, it's a literal and it's a figurative kind of barrier that to remind us of the limitations that we have right now in terms of ourselves collectively and individually. I love that idea, actually. That's really well said. In the clicking out process, if you notice, it doesn't really pay attention attention, and it pays it no mind in terms of that FOIA document, in terms of in terms of the ideas that we have about quote unquote outer space. It pays no attention to that, as if it's not even a bother. And that's something, you know, sometimes when you don't put something in a document is almost as important, because if you think about the document, they actually put in, you know, Einstein's theory of relativity, and they made a point to put that on there, and they said it's okay because you're in this time space. Why that would be an admission by omittance. They omitted the fact of space, which should be an incredibly important part of this document, that I think you've just talked about. And that is it. That's part of it, because it's just a matter of limitation that's not even worth the mention, at least for people that would come into possession. Because I believe this document is like I said, it's a grimoire. When you're ready for it, it will appear. You know, it's sort of like when the student's ready, the master will appear. When you are ready, the document will appear. And when you're ready to listen, those sounds will enter your ear. If you're ready to listen, you will hear what you need to hear, and you'll be able to understand. Because the funny thing is, I've listened to things 15 times, and until someone corrects me and helps me understand what it is I'm listening to, suddenly a whole new world opens up, and it's almost as if those words have suddenly taken on a meaning that I had no idea about. And if you translate something like that into a more holistic approach and use that as kind of your template, like what you said, and you apply that to space, then suddenly space takes on an entirely different meaning, you know, literally and metaphorically. And then to the dissolving consensus, that's where it falls apart, where human beings don't believe, or human beings, they don't think we went to the moon, or that the earth is flat. And suddenly you no longer have an overarching rule in terms of your mind and consciousness of like scientism or the government or whatever it is. And you see the slow chip down and breakdown. And with that, if this document is absolutely 100% correct, then you're left with the idea that human beings do in fact are seated from their consciousness. And if those consciousness can get away, if those sheeps can leave the herd, then perhaps you are truly free. I don't know. But it sounds to me like what you stumbled on there is exactly it. Man, that's pretty profound, actually, chick.
Thank you. I think that
Did you just think of that, or was that like something you wrote down?
No, I was just thinking right now. I like I like to freestyle on this show.
Because sometimes, do you like do you ever bring notes or anything?
Sometimes when I'm talking about like specific paranormal stuff, like the Bennington Triangle or like ghosts or something specific that I want to have the names and the dates and the things like that, yes. But for like concepts and stuff, I think it's better to just blah it out, because then it kind of informs as you're doing it. And I think that when we add superposition to the element that we've already talked about, that would explain what some people might, and this is complete conjecture again, this is more you know, just wild going along here, but I think that if you add superposition to the different frequency bandwidths of existence, like we just talked about there, it would explain what some people, I believe, like spiritual people, meditation people, perhaps people that are not specifically in any kind of organized religious view, what they might call like the part of themselves, like the higher self.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might actually just be a Mandela Effect concept, where you're kind of in touch with your own consciousness, but not, you know, just on a different Orion Earth, but actually in a different frequency bandwidth of reality entirely, as if like we could still talk to ourselves still in the Sagittarius arm, not obviously all the time, but just like a passing impression. And because it's yourself, of course, you can speak to yourself. So in that, I don't actually see it as like a blasphemous thing. Whereas some people might say, oh, that's kind of a new agey thing. But I'm like, if it's yourself and you're talking to yourself, how could it be? And that, I think that's a huge key in this whole thing, is that, like you said, when we don't have an overarching belief of what's going on in reality, therefore everything's kind of falling apart. And the government used to be this big monolithic thing, at least to me, and now it seems fractured, especially with, you know, political things and everything like that. But I think there are parts that want to push UFOs and want to talk about weird stuff, and I think there are other parts that want to push 5G and want to just business as usual. And I think even that is not it's not coherent. And I think while some people might think that's completely irrelevant, if what we all believe and think is really going on helps solidify what's really going on in the Orion holographic reality, then it is very important to all read off the same script for the most part. Like, you want 90% of people to read off the same script so it'll stay kind of cohesive. And if everybody is like, nah, I don't think it's that, I think it's something else, and that actually has some kind of effect on what's going on, I think that might explain a lot of dissolving consensus things.
I too, and part of that too, I think, is that if we have to stop thinking in terms of being enemies, being this community, also particularly with people in our top chat or our live. Oh man, I'm on top chat. I want live chat. Oh man. But in terms of our live chat, we've got to start thinking more in terms of perhaps we're seeing the waves. We can see the waves a bit further out than others, and as these waves come in, because I don't, if reality isn't malleable, then that means reality can change, and reality is actually a moving machine whenever we're co-creating together. And if the movement of other things happen because we're Mandela affected or whatever it may be, and we have other beings that may be coming into play here, which apparently it looks like it's going to happen, then you're talking about we're the first. We're the first ones to see that. We're on the front lines of this, and we're the ones that can understand that because we think that way. We understand those things that way, and we're able to cope with it. And I think in terms of higher self, what I really think of is your subconscious. That is kind of the higher self. And I know that sounds me receding back into that reductive material thing, but but I'm trying to use a universal language too, because I know you did mention, and kind of funny, I was watching that video with To the Stars Academy, and they were talking about people having a very hard time that were to the fact because they had belief systems. So then I'm willing to have a universal vocabulary in terms of variables. So no matter what I'm saying, whether it's a higher self or it's a subconscious, whatever it is that makes you comfortable, we're essentially talking about all of these same things. And I just want to make sure that people are comfortable whenever we apply these terms like you were able to do, and kind of switch out those terms, as long as we can make it so anyone that is truly Mandela affected at this level and is listening to my voice, they're able to understand what's happening, and that way they're able to cope better. And that way oftentimes you can become kind of a I'm not really a leader, but kind of, when people see you're calm when everyone else isn't, they'll say, what's going on there, what's happening? And perhaps others can look to you and you can explain, hey, well, there's the Mandela effect, we've got this FOIA thing, this is what's happening, this is how it actually works. And you're able to be given the tools to cope with the reality that's actually there versus the reality that that's going to be there anyway, and actually get worse if you don't co-create. You have to participate in this reality, because for better for worse, we're all here and we're here together. So us being active in our own reality and not victims of circumstance is probably the most powerful thing we can do here in this live chat, and at least whenever we're around each other 1 hour a week, or the whenever I can pop on the channel, or with me and you, or Buster and myself, and or all three of us, or whatever it may be. So
And I want to pull back to a point that you mentioned earlier, which I thought was very important, is that not just giving value to your own senses, but it's, to me, madness and some kind of weird psychological training that you would give more weight and value to an authority figure or something outside of yourself than your own senses. As in, like, sure, your senses could be altered or you could be drunk, or that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is your gut feeling of what you know is going on should have a massive amount of leverage and authority in your own view, because it is you. And when you can't really be sure of what's going on with the Orion reality and the stuff that, whatever the heck is going on here, I think you should give even more weight and value to you and what you think is going on, because you're not a small pawn being told what to do. You're one of the last remaining people that can really see what's happening. There's so very few of us now. And I don't know if that's because after 2015, everybody scattered like the CERN particles and just flew into the wind. And I don't think, that I haven't talked to the contact, as I said. So as far as I know, CERN could still just be a cover story, or like a kind of painting or animation or visualization of what's happening on a large scale, but not actually causing it. As in, your consciousness could be blown apart into various, collapse on itself and be blown apart into various parts of reality. And perhaps that's why you're now conscious of the fact that you are many parts of the one same thing. Like, there's one of me here, there's one of me in the next Earth, there's one of me on the Earth from 3 years ago, there's one of me in the Sagittarius arm. I think that is happening, and I can't really explain it, but I feel like the connections between the different yous everywhere are becoming stronger, and the barriers are breaking down. And because that's making your consciousness so much stronger, because you're not segregated, you're kind of coming back into not just reality, but into a much healthier state of existence. Because if you're segregated from parts of yourself in different realities, and you only get to kind of coalesce with yourself during like deep sleep, or when your brainwaves are different, that's not healthy. That's like some kind of crazed dissociative disorder, or like schizophrenia or something like that. That's not good. So it's great that that's kind of going away, and you're kind of coming back together into being one person. And I think a superposition consciousness probably is what exists in higher dimensions, and probably the superposition consciousness is a more complicated way of having all of yourself be kind of one mind, not like the mass collective and stuff that they talk about, but literally just you stop being a collective and you start being yourself.
Awesome. Yeah, I've had that idea too of, if there are multiple versions of me, I want to be a friend to myself, and that I don't have to be just in a superposition state to be aware that there is a multiverse and there's many versions of me, and that whenever I do come together, it can be in this conscious state, even though there's nothing physically that I can affect right now. But it's still super important that I know it's there, and that perhaps, like you said, in the sleep state, I can go ahead and come together into that kind of superposition, and outside of that sleep state, I can still be aware of myself in a way. And it's also too, I think it's really important to start understanding, just opening your mind to all these kinds of possibilities is first the most scariest and the biggest step, and to really truly internalize these ideas and take them seriously. And once you're able to do that, then you can start using those coping mechanisms that we all naturally have to be able to say, okay, look, this idea that we had about life and the way life was always going to be, perhaps is going to change for us from now on. And it started with this idea of the Mandela effect. And just like with the Mandela effect, you start to learn those coping mechanisms. And after you get to that, then you're ready for the next step, and then the next, and then the next. And then eventually it becomes interesting. And dare I say, you almost look for it, and you're like, my gosh, what's next? It's kind of as if you are on a bit of an adventure. Even you and our conversations, I would never say you and I were fearful, but you and I were cautious very early on. I think. I mean, I'm not speaking for you, but I feel as if it's that way. However, I almost feel as if, excuse me, I almost just feel as if that's changed now. What do you think?
I think so. I think that things have gotten so much weirder, like going deeper and deeper into the Orion reality, that it's not even that wild to be talking about what's literally going on now. As in, like, every step has gotten wilder and wilder. And we used to be, afraid, like, well, maybe some of these things are just too out there, because there's people who are just waking up and they're just trying to find their feet. They're just trying to deal with the Mandela effect. And now we're talking about the moon is inside Earth's atmosphere. and they're shooting, bodies up to the moon, and there's a graveyard up there, like there's a guy buried up there,
Love
and
it.
there's shooting guys into outer space that are dead, and like there's all kinds of just weird things going on. And it's not even weird anymore because we've just been in this like bath of surreal madness for a couple of years now. And the more surreal it gets, the more normal it gets. The more you go, oh yeah, that's not weird. The moon
Yeah.
can do whatever it wants. The moon was like sideways last night. It was totally mad. It was like cut in half, like not even crescenty, but just like cut in half. And the half was like slanted, like a weird, not, I'm trying to think of exactly the angle, maybe like a 45-degree angle up in the sky. It was just completely insane. It didn't make any sense. It didn't match the way the moon was the night before. It's not going to match the way the moon will be tonight. I'm just kind of gotten used to there's nothing coherent going on here in any linear sense. So it kind of opens us up to possibilities of everything.
Yeah, and I know what you mean about the moon. I get up very, very early, sometimes as early as 3:30 in the morning to start my day. And the first thing I do is I go outside and look up at the stars because once I started to notice in me, I knew exactly. I saw this. The moon was not at all consistent anymore. Whenever I was younger, you could always see the face in the moon, and you knew when it was a full moon. And I used to live at right on the beach, and there was nothing but ocean. So the moon it looked massive whenever I was much younger. It was a massive just thing there, and there was nothing to block you because there was nothing but the Atlantic Ocean. And now it's as if it's more distant, it's less consistent. There's a face sometimes there's not the face. Sometimes the face is on sideways, sometimes it's completely different. And I think it's a lot to do with the shifting. And then you're right. I used to remember I remembered very young, waxing gibbous, waning gibbous, waxing crescent, waning crescent. I knew all my phases of the moon. I knew them by heart. I knew exactly how it should look and all of those things. And I've long since forgotten those things because a lot of those things are absolutely pointless because the moon of my childhood no longer exists. I don't know where it went, but it's not there anymore. So all of those things just adds to the fact that the moon is talk about a slip. The moon is in the atmosphere. The moon is a great place to jettison corpses. The moon does have an Andy Warhol. The moon, all of those things. And at this point, I don't even know. But I will say the coolest thing about the moon is, for some odd reason, it does seem to be a consistent theme in my life and apparently your life as well, because not a lot of people like you and I talk about it all the time, just naturally look up to pay attention to it in their daily lives. So
I find that very strange too, because on at least where I was from, people would look
uh,
at the moon all the time. They used to think that the moon was a romantic thing. And I'm not sure exactly when that changed. It might be an Orion thing that nobody's bothered with the moon whatsoever. But it used to be, endless paintings, and people would like to eat in restaurants and like look up at the moon. Like everybody liked looking at the moon, and now nobody does, and no one even talks about it. They don't know what the
yeah.
sun looks like, and they don't know what the moon looks like, and it's just like not done here for some reason. And
Oh man.
I have been thinking about one of the things that I hadn't thought of it really this way before, I think, but about the way people behave so differently here. I started to think, well, maybe if this is getting closer to, and I know it doesn't seem this way now because it's so chaotic, but if we are moving in a positive direction and you were moving towards a reality that didn't have, quite the same level of, density and all kinds of crazy things like that were going on in the Sagittarius Arm, World War III, and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
It's not ideal, but if it's moving in a better direction, then maybe it makes sense that there would be populations that don't really operate from needing to be so on guard, and they don't really operate from, you need to be sensible and you need to be mildly afraid all the time. They don't display any of that, and maybe that's going to be an irrelevant concept as we go on. Like I always think of us as coming from like the really old world where like people were descended from the people that were able to fight or were smart or were, whatever it was that helped your people survive and get to this point. But it doesn't seem like anybody here really needs to do that. As in, the people that are from the Orion Arm, none of them seem to be, overly careful or overly cautious. They argue about certain things, like mainstream topics, all the time, but they don't seem to be always on the alert for a threat or for something that's coming up next. Maybe in the truther community because they're more awake, but I'm talking about more the general population. They seem to be very relaxed in a weird sense and not alert in a weird sense. And I wonder if that could actually be leading towards a positive transition wherein they don't need to be. The threats aren't there.
Well, and that goes back to kind of, and I hate to harp on it again. I implore everyone, please, that the dumps that have happened, the data dumps of the confirmations that happened in the last 48 hours has been a major change to our understanding as human beings. Our government, or at least the U.S. government, and I would imagine probably most of the world governments have it. They've told you very plainly that UFOs do exist. We are not alone. And the reason why we're not in this chat, we're not worried about it is because we had the FOIA document for the last 4 or 5 months. We've known that they've known for more than 30 years. We've known about the gateway process. We've known about all these things. And to your point about people being less fearful, perhaps that's part of this. And the reason why there can be sort of this revealing of this kind of situation. I don't know, but certainly we'll be able to talk through it as it happens in real time. And what we'll be able to do in real time is, as these situations become more dynamic in terms of our understanding of our reality and our understanding of us, just the idea that we are the only species that is here, and the fact that they've always been here and that it's being revealed is, that is going to become something that would be remembered as people may look back and go, gosh, I can't imagine what that's like we would the Middle Ages or something. I can't imagine what that would be like, and it could certainly be something that kind of situation. And it would, like I said yesterday, it's a situation that's going to be, it's a re-understanding. And it happened with the Mandela Effect. It was a re-understanding. You had a massive re-understanding, and it was more internal. And though this one is going to be internal, it's also going to be partially external in a way that you are you're always around sentient beings. They're just going to be in a bit of a different form. And I think that is still somehow related to this Mandela Effect. And I'm not entirely sure how, but it is. It's all together, and it's all together, and it all matters. And there's 107 people watching, which is absolutely wonderful, but there's only 49 likes. And we've maintained over 100 people watching right now. So I'm assuming the other 50 are waiting to give us that like, because the way it works for in YouTube is we need those likes. So channels that aren't promoted as much, perhaps mine is, perhaps mine isn't, or ours at this point, because the SMQAI now is a team. So if you could promote our channel as a team and give us those thumbs up, it would be very helpful. And it'll help get the word out, because I think what it is we're going to be that kind of channel that when you're ready for us, we're going to kind of enter your orbit. And I truly believe that now. And I think it's going to be an incredibly positive thing for once we enter your orbit, that it's going to be good for you. It's going to be good for the chat, and we'll all thrive together. So please get those thumbs up there, and that would be incredibly. It's free. It's easy. There's always the super chat, and that's fine. Eventually, we were always talking about doing a real big project, and that would help too. But if not, that's fine too. It's really about the energy and obviously the thumbs up. So I had to do my shameless promotion there at the end here, chick. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I think that there's a lot of different ground to cover, and I hope that people don't mind that I was on a particular trajectory today, consciousness-wise. But it just feels like it's not just going to be revelations about what's going on outside, but what's going on inside with us as well. And I think that it fits very much with the holographic principle that we have various types of consciousness within the one, head, the one skull, as in You could have your superpositioned parts of you in existence, and then within your own head, like you mentioned, you have your subconscious, you have your reptilian, you have your frontal cortex. Like you have several different. It's almost like a hybridized brain, and it's far more pronounced in the Orion arm than it was in the Sagittarius arm.
Mm-hmm.
It almost looks like three different brains sewed together is what's sitting in your head right now. And the brain is changing and changing and changing. I've seen different Mandela Effect channels that do more about the body changes. They said that there's all kinds of things going on with the amygdalas and just different parts of the brain that weren't even there before. It's not even just that they're changing, but the entire system seems to be changing. And I think that is obviously going to change our perception and awareness and what we're able to contemplate. So I think that's going to be a huge part of what's coming up. And let's see, what else were we going to talk about? No, go ahead.
Well, I just want to give a shout out to Mel. Thanks, Mel, for being really being out there and being helpful in the chat today, and really to all the usual suspects for just being awesome in the chat. And Prelim, I like the idea of, the analytical side is absolutely important, but I do like the idea of kind of writing yourself into your own story. That's kind of a cool idea, Prelim. Kind of be your own creation, do the whole Parsons thing where you're kind of writing yourself into your own adventure kind of thing. And I don't know, maybe we've done that subconsciously, because, I think it was William Burroughs who had said he had to write himself out of the mess he had gotten himself in early on in life, and in a lot of ways you have the ability to do that, and I think that's kind of I think it's kind of interesting. Oh, listen to this, Ben Lighton, thank you very much for the super chat. It says here, Frazia never says this isn't even my final form. Very cool, very cool. So, but yeah, I like that idea of writing yourself in or not being in your final form, always evolving, and whether it's internally or externally or whatever it may be. So cool. Yeah, don't overthink it. Totally don't overthink it. In fact, underthink it. Be mindless. Be mindless in a good way, like in the Power of Now kind of way, So we're starting to wind down here. What else do we got here?
There are more geological changes. We may have talked about it last week, but it's almost like South Africa is kind of turning toward more and more towards South America. And there's ridges appearing in the ocean now between the tip of Africa and between South America. So those are going to start pulling together a lot more. I think that history makes a little bit more sense now that Jersey is becoming more of a main place, because obviously New Jersey. So it makes more sense that there's a Jersey there. Just like York is in England and there's a New York in the US, it kind of makes sense now that there's a Jersey. But like in the past, Jersey was part of mainland UK, so I don't know why there's also an island Jersey, or perhaps it's only an island Jersey now, but there's a lot of things changing and moving around. France and the UK are even closer together. That's going to have more and more on the southern part of the UK. That's going to have more of an effect on the Second World War. It may even affect other circumstances, history-wise. So we'll just have to keep an eye on that. And there's a couple of more movements with Asia as well. Japan is looking very different to me. There's a lot of things going on, and it's going in the same pattern as it has been for the past couple of years. Is the presentation, at least, of the Earth, whether you believe it's flat or globe, it's getting smaller. And countries are getting more closer and closer together, and the land masses are shrinking for the most part, except like obviously Sicily, Corsica, Sardinia, like those places are getting bigger, but that might be to fill in the Mediterranean Sea. I do think that's going to disappear. It's either going to crush completely into Africa, or it's just going to become landmass, because Sweden is moving so far south now that it's just like Europe is going to just clump into one thing. I don't think the Viking countries are going to be separate whatsoever, like Norway, Sweden. I was going to say Denmark, but Denmark had moved to Southern Europe a couple of years ago for me, so that's already a done deal. Just for anyone that's wondering, the Pangea is continuing at an alarming rate.
So, and I like the idea of being able to put the changes in history that we have to those geo shifts and everything and how it alters history, and the World War II changes we were talking about were very relevant. But, you know, I'm also wondering too, I'm starting to see a lot more scientists discovering things that are shocking. And we've touched upon that before, but more and more articles are talking about scientists are discovering minerals in areas they shouldn't be there, or new kinds of minerals, and they didn't know certain kinds of minerals can exist in different kinds of environments. Do you think part of the geoshifts themselves too is just like what the anonymous doctor I talked to, how the molecular structures of things can actually change? Do you think the actual molecular structure of different kinds of minerals and stones and things like that could be part of that process, so it can shape and morph and move, so there's a more consistent pattern? And do you think that the Mandela shift is or the Mandela geo shifts are actually part of the prerequisite for a major Mandela shift to actually happen? What do you think? I mean, I'm just speculating, but it seems to be that they kind of, all of that kind of goes hand in hand now.
True. I think that there's great potential there for there to be a sudden and massive geological shift, because
Hmm.
it's kind of been almost like the Schumann resonance, kind of doing those little bandwidth peaks, like the 1, 2, 3 that happened while you had your live Mandela Effect shift. That seems to be almost the pattern for the last couple of months, or even a bit longer than that, of the geo shifts. And it
Hmm.
used to be there would be a big change and then small changes and then a big change and small changes. And it's just been small ish changes for a long time. So I am expecting that something massive will happen pretty soon. I'm actually surprised it hasn't happened already. Like, and I'm talking on the scale of like a new continent, or perhaps like Asia will just be a completely different shape and have a completely different history, because Asia's
Well,
been moving a lot. So I'm kind of suspect of that.
Well, from what I hear from my contact, we're talking, more changes in the coming weeks, and I don't know if you could necessarily call that a Mandela effect, but you certainly can in terms of shifts in consciousness. I mean, something is going to happen. I mean, these changes over the last, the confirmation that just took place, it was for people paying attention, and what we're going to do is elevate people and help them, you know, we're going to point that out to people that this has already taken place. It's a done deal. And then if it becomes something more apparent, they could be that very thing that you're talking about. Um, I can't believe it's been an hour, man. It felt like 5 minutes.
Just to clarify again, because someone in the chat was getting confused, when I said that it's closer to southern Europe, I didn't mean like the south of Europe that's up on top of Africa. What I meant is that it's not far up near the North Pole anymore. I meant that those countries have moved down to where they're like on top of Poland and Germany, which from my perspective, where I'm coming from, is like it's incredibly further south than it should be. Like those
Mhm.
countries should be way, way north, and they're not. They're way south. And if they had been where they are now, it would have changed my entire life, because I think I would have gone and definitely traveled there, but maybe even lived there, because it would have been a comparable climate to Ireland and England, because it's in some cases further south, I think, than Ireland and England. I'm thinking of, oh gosh, what's the name of the island that's part of Denmark? Bornholm, I believe, is further south than Ireland and England, and Bornholm didn't exist. And those countries, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, they were so far north, they were so cold that I didn't want to go there. And now they're so far south, I definitely would have wanted to go there. So it's really, really strange.
Mhm.
But I don't mean that they're, down beside Italy or anything like that, because people were getting confused in the chat.
Sure, sure. All right, everybody, that's it. Get those thumbs up if you don't mind, if you haven't already. And for anybody in the future listening, if you could give us that thumbs up, that would be awesome. That is episode. We're wrapping up episode 58 here, and look out for any new information that could be dropping. And I'll be on as soon as I hear something, and I'll let you know immediately. So, thank you very much, everybody.